When you have a wound, it scabs over. The scab is the protection. It's best not to rip the scab off. Let it come off in the fullness of time. People you meet have been wounded, hurt in many ways. And they've reacted in consequence the way they do. And their current reaction to such things is not always beautiful. It's more like a scab that protects the wound, that needs to heal through time underneath. So don't go ripping the scab off for them. It's a bit crusty, leave it there. Let it fall off in the fullness of time. And in the meantime, be gracious. In as far as you can be. Reasonably. We extend grace. Thank you, Heavenly Father. Well, for instance, if someone's bitter about something, to simply tell them not to be bitter, of course. Still injured, you see. Whereas if, well, you're still nice to them and helpful, they can start to want to put the bitterness behind them. Don't want to carry it anymore. Sometimes you can talk with them about it and they get it off their chest, so to speak. Oh, if you're not used to that sort of phrase, I mean, they feel better for having talked it over with you and thought about it and perhaps seen it from a slightly different light, because they're thinking all the time what you will think as they give the story. And whenever we give history, we change it a little, you know. It's according to who we are, what we emphasize, what we remember, even what we heard. That can make it worse, of course. Some people will be forever hardening the story. It becomes more and more unjust, perhaps, the treatment that they experienced. And the perpetrator becomes an absolute villain over time. It's really what a grudge, people that have a grudge seem to be suffering from. Some wounds just need time. It's as if time itself reduces the problem to of no account. Though, as I say, some people seem to have an ability to increase the hatred, desire for revenge, not let it go. It's a great burden to them. Don't let it be a burden to yourself. I don't mean necessarily walk away from such, but in your heart, thank God for the difficulty they've had, and for whatever God is doing in their life with it. You probably won't be able to work that out, except that you may know in your heart that they've likely caused, in some sense, the very injustice as they see it happening. And you can't jump in there and tell them that, of course. You can't tell them to ignore the past. You might try to explore other aspects pertinent to the story that they're constantly harping on about, so to speak. And in some sense lead their mind closer to a fuller picture, which, in the fullness of the complexity of life, may start to make more sense to them, so that they understand rather more than they would if just left to their own devices. You see, we are all constantly rewriting history. And we can find we're doing it by only emphasizing certain points without realizing it. And these points dominate in our attitude to the event that we're supposing took place in the past. So if you join the person in a rather happier state and propensity than they have, you will start to influence their story and make it more possible for them to leave their present view behind. Typically they need to see that the event is not so uncommon as one might like it to be, even their interpretation of it. And that it can be understood in more general, non-personal way. But in some sense the harm is not so much directed at them, but caused by causes and conditions in the circumstances in which people find themselves. You see, we have, for some reason in our culture, an incredible conviction that we are free individuals and we choose our behavior and we choose our values. We choose a situation that we find ourselves in. And you can see this vividly when you ask someone, why did so-and-so do that? Oh, broadly speaking, they say, he's malevolent, he's bad in some way, he caused this harm. He did it wittingly and willingly, and he is responsible for the damage. But when it comes to themselves, they're far more likely to argue that, well, they understood it at the time to be the best thing to do. They didn't know what else to do. They were in a fix. They had to do it. It wasn't their fault. You see, we're not consistent in our explanation across people. If we love them, we infer that it wasn't their fault. And if we don't love them, we accuse that it was their free will and they were deliberately harmful with a menacing intention to treat us unjustly. With me, it was right to defend myself and protect myself. For them, it was pure selfishness that motivated them to harm me. The extreme is shown in war situations where our enemy is always classified as being a madman after a while. Hitler was clearly deranged. Their leaders are heartless tyrants. Ours, desperately trying to do what's best in the circumstances. Don't fall for the argument. Protect yourself as is required, but don't condemn the other. My enemy is the person whose story I have not yet heard. Thank you, Heavenly Father. We have the classic case of Jesus on the cross saying, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And clearly they knew they were crucifying him. So what does it mean? It means that if they had known better, they would not do it. In other words, they have a level of incompetence that is responsible for them choosing to do what they do. And so I can say of someone, well, they're carrying this grudge. I suspect that actually the injustice that they perceive is in some measure caused by themselves. But that doesn't mean I follow up with, therefore they're to blame. On the contrary, it's followed up with, and they did not choose who they were, where they were born, what genes they had, what happened in their life, and what the outcome was, with perfect understanding and knowledge, and good values delivered straight from the mind of God. They chose according to the experience and the background that they have. You may say that they came with a propensity to draw a particular lifestyle, background, and future. But it's not reasonable to isolate the causal set to themselves, something that they had sovereign enlightened command over and chose to do evil. The whole reality of living is that we do not know what is truly good. We do not know what values are reliably right and best, and even what best means. For we live in a world, a universe of uncertainty. We're not sure whether mum's right or dad's right, or both are right or both are wrong, or that God exists. We might not even be sure that God is benevolent and therefore shy away from God. We might erroneously believe that every individual is to blame for all that they do. Does that mean something is without cause? Doesn't what is depend on a whole string of causation going back to time eternal? Did you choose the occupation your dad had and how he met your mum and why he had children and so on and so forth? Did he choose the values that his parents had and that influenced him in his life? Were his parents responsible for the place and culture that they were born into? And so it goes on. And if we are, in large measure, captive in this chain of causation, isn't it lovely that for some reason you and I, and possibly all of us, still have this desire to rescue others from the difficulties that they find themselves in, wittingly or otherwise. How lovely that we can be a blessing, that we can introduce some cause into their being that rescues them into some goodness that they would not otherwise have had. How lovely. Thank you, Heavenly Father.